Hey everybody, welcome back to Sounds Like a Drum, Cadence Independent Media Production, Cymbal Series Day. Today we are talking about dynamics in the cymbals, the ride and also the hi-hat, and whether or not you're getting the sound you mean to get when you play at a certain volume threshold. It seems like more is more, hitting harder should get a bigger sound. That makes sense intellectually, but it's not actually what happens when you start to dig into cymbals. It's a really different experience than drums, but there are some things that are shared there. What we want to talk about today is the actual sound that you're getting when you're playing really softly, all the way up to playing super aggressively, and where the biggest sound really lies. We got into this today and actually had some kind of surprising discoveries as we moved between these instruments. Today we're going to start out with this ride cymbal. What you're going to hear first is a series of demos, just the ride cymbal alone, that are played at different volume levels, but we are normalizing them, which is to say we are raising the volume of the recording up to match. So they're all going to sound the same volume, but the tone is going to be significantly different. This is exactly what we're talking about here. Hitting it softer makes a quieter sound, but if you listen closely, the decay of that quieter sound for a listener or for a microphone, which is also a listener, is significantly different than if we are hitting it as hard as we can because of the way that this piece of metal moves. Sometimes hitting it hard is the right sound, but if you're going for the best sound for what you want for the music you're making, sometimes backing off a little bit and seeing exactly how the cymbal's behaving under that level of intensity is worth noting. Now, granted, this is a pretty thin cymbal, so as always, your mileage will definitely vary, but the way that metal behaves when you strike it with a stick, especially if you start moving between different sizes and weights of sticks, is going to be really dramatic. Now, let's hear a similar demo in the context of the whole kit. What we're hearing here is a real concern in any performance situation, but particularly in recording environments where we aren't necessarily demanded to play at a certain volume level because we're utilizing microphones and outboard equipment to give us that volume in the recording. This means that if the best sound in a recording environment is a gentler sound once it gets to the computer or the tape or whatever medium you're using, then it's worth being able to find comfort in playing softly and also playing super aggressively so that you have the whole palette available to you. I also find myself oftentimes trying to change the dynamic between just one part of the kit, for instance, hitting the snare drum harder but not hitting the cymbals quite as hard depending on the environment. That's also worth checking out. We've talked a lot in the past about how certain rooms and spaces will have a better or worse sound at a given tuning. So you work with your drums and try to find the optimal sound of the instrument for the environment that you're in. Similarly, there can be a best dynamic for a certain space. If it's a gymnasium, that's one thing. If it's a hyper padded room or a whisper room, that's another thing. And being able to make adjustments and analyze the environment as you're playing to make these choices is going to get you the best result. This may even mean choosing a different cymbal or changing the tuning of your snare drum. There's a lot of possibilities there, but first and foremost, explore what's happening in front of you before you make any drastic changes. A very important public service announcement we want to make at this juncture is that this is super important when you are performing, practicing, recording, all of that. It's also very important when it comes to cymbals that you don't yet own. When you're shopping, when you're in a store, the environment that you're in, especially if it's a cymbal room full of cymbals hung up and you're playing one in the middle of the room, everything in that space is affecting your experience with that cymbal. It's really important to make sure that you're familiar with the sticks that you're using when you're testing it, understand those variables in the environment, and if you're like me, maybe bring your cymbals from home so you don't accidentally buy something that sounds like ones you already have just because you think it sounds good. Of course it sounds good. It sounds like the ones you have. Now we want to step over to the hi-hat where we actually had even more surprising discoveries. For this demo that you just heard, I tried to maintain the same amount of foot pressure on the pedal for the duration. So naturally, when I start to hit it harder, I'm putting more energy into the cymbals, they're moving more, and we're ending up with a bigger, broader sound as I hit them harder. Now check out what happens when I increase my foot pressure as I increase the intensity of striking the cymbals. Now we also have a different tone throughout this, but the breadth and the width and the beefiness of the sound is much tighter all the way through it. These are things to be aware of when you're thinking about playing louder than you normally do or quieter than you normally do. Realize that unlike the ride cymbal, beyond the stick, we also have a foot here that is going to really have a huge effect on the closed sound of the cymbals. This can be a major blind spot if you, like many players, sit kind of like a tripod where you have weight on both of your feet all of the time, perhaps burying the beater and holding the hi-hats closed. Consider the possibility of trying to center your weight on the throne so that you free up that foot to make these micro adjustments. Let's take the hi-hat now into a full groove and see how that sounds. As with the first groove, I am also trying to increase the dynamic of the kick and the snare as the hi-hat is getting played stronger so that the whole thing balances out. But again, you could consider each of these things separate and possibly play the hi-hat more gently or the snare harder or vice versa, depending on the environment that you're in. As drum set players, we don't have the same kind of access to melody as melodic instruments do, whether it's, a marimba or a saxophone or whatever it is. So because we're playing this instrument, the dynamics we choose have so much more to do with how our performance ultimately feels. This means that having control over interdynamics and each of these pieces and then how they work together collectively is a huge part of our palette. So we want to make sure that we spend as much time as we can exploring the parts of it that we spend less time on and making sure that we have control and comfort at all levels.